Good evening. Welcome to History for Relaxing. Tonight, we turn our attention inward toward a quieter time, though not a gentler one. A time where silence echoed louder than words, where stone corridors carried the footfalls of discipline, and where life unfolded in strict rhythm under the weight of eternity. This is a journey into the cloistered world of medieval monastic life, and the spiritual architecture that defined it both, in stone and in soul. We will walk softly through ancient monasteries, observe lives shaped by prayer and penance. Hear the echoes of trials and visions, explore secret knowledge kept alive against the dark, and finally glimpse the subtle privileges tucked behind austere walls. You need do nothing now but listen. Let your mind slow to the measured rhythm of chants and bells. Let your thoughts meander like candlelight dancing across a vellum page. Let us begin. Imagine yourself in the chill of a stone chamber. The air is cool, dense, and still. Your straw-stuffed mattress rests atop bare boards. Outside the narrow window, darkness holds the world in its grip. Thick, ancient darkness, broken only by a pale sliver of moonlight. A bell tolls softly. It is the nocturne's bell, signaling the hour of 3 a.m. The day begins. You rise in silence. There is no speaking, no yawning, no rustling of robes beyond what necessity allows. Every movement is intentional. Every sound feels like intrusion. You are one of dozens of monks, bound by sacred rule to the order's rhythm, and that rhythm does not bend. By the dim light of tallow candles, you and your brethren file into the stone chapel. The cold seeps into the hem of your robe, yet your hands are warm from holding your worn wooden prayer beads. You do not speak, but you do chant slowly, monotonously. The Latin words lifting into the arches above, dissolving into the silence that follows. Lord, open my lips, you softly chant in Latin, feeling the words flow. The chants are not songs of joy. They are prayers carved out of discipline. There is no music, only tone. No harmony, only unity. You sing not to be heard, but to fulfill the rule. This is the rule of Saint Benedict, a set of instructions laid down centuries earlier. In the 6th century, and carried with faithful precision into the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries, where we find ourselves now. The rule governs everything: when to rise, when to pray, what to eat, what to wear, how to speak, or not to speak. Most hours of your day will pass in silence. There are periods of communal speech, brief, controlled, and strictly purposeful, but they are rare. Even then, conversation is subdued, functional. Small talk is not only discouraged, but forbidden. Language is sacred, not social. And silence is not absence, it is presence, a form of reverence. By dawn, you have already sung through matins and lauds. The sky glows faintly through the narrow slits of stained glass, and the chapel feels less like a chamber of worship and more like a vessel suspended outside of time. After the final chant fades, you file into the scriptorium. The scriptorium is a long, narrow room lined with desks, each one facing a small window. The monks who labor here are scripters dedicated to the quiet preservation of holy texts. You may be one of them. You sit at your desk, take up your quill, and begin to copy. Letter by letter, word by word, page by page. The light is weak. Even at midday, it barely spills across your parchment. Candles help, but the smoke gathers in the rafters, and your eyes grow weary from the flickering shadows. You write in Latin, the language of the church, and every stroke must be precise. A single error means starting again. It is a labor of obedience, not creativity. Outside the scriptorium, others are at work. In the herb garden, silent figures tend to medicinal plants, lavender, rue, and sage. In the kitchens, bread is prepared without chatter. In the dormitories, robes are mended, beads tasks performed with bowed heads and hands trained in humble repetition. Midday comes, and with it, the refectorium, the dining hall. You eat in silence, your meal consisting of bread, perhaps a stew of beans or leeks, and a cup of weak ale. Meat is forbidden on most days, and even fish is a luxury. While you eat, one of your brothers reads aloud from a sacred text. His voice is steady. You are not meant to engage with the reading, only to receive it. It is nourishment for the soul as the meal is for the body. Then comes none, the ninth hour prayer, and more labor. Perhaps you tend the sheep, mend a fence, or sweep the cloisters. Every act is a prayer, every duty a surrender. The rhythm of your life is not your own. It belongs to God and to the rule. As twilight falls, you return once more to the chapel. The prayers of Vespers rise like mist in the fading light. Later, you will sit for compline the final prayer of the day before retiring in silence once again. No idle thoughts, no whispered laughter, only the hush of robes brushing stone and the stillness of a life given entirely to order. And yet, in this silence, something grows. A kind of spiritual gravity, pulling you inward. You live not for the world, but apart from it. The monastery is both a refuge and a crucible. The silence, at times oppressive, is also the medium through which devotion is refined. It is easy to romanticize this life, to imagine peaceful gardens and sacred music. But the reality is more demanding. This is not a place of comfort, it is a place of surrender. Here, every day is a slow offering. Every hour is an act of relinquishment. And still, the bell will ring again at 3 a.m., and you will rise again with the sound of its ringing tone. Imagine the hush of a cathedral-sized hall, stone walls rising on every side, the faintest sound echoing as though whispered into the vaulted heavens above. At the center, a lone figure, a young woman, not yet 20, bound by faith, surrounded by doubt, and caught within the slow, grinding machinery of judgment. This is the trial of Joan of Arc. And here, in this dim court of men and memory, we move not with haste or fury, but with the heavy quiet of inevitability. Let us begin not with her end, but with her visions. Joan was born in a small village in northeastern France. In the year 1412, she was a peasant girl, illiterate, pious, devoted. The rhythm of her childhood was that of fields and feast days, of prayers whispered at twilight and saints venerated in candlelight. And then, when she was still a child, she began to hear voices. They came to her, she said, not with violence or command, but with peace. Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. They did not demand, they invited her. She said they shone with brilliance, that their presence brought joy, not fear, but they also brought a message. France was suffering. Her king had not been crowned. Her people were divided, and the voices told her she had a role to play. She resisted. At first, she was a girl. She could not fight, she could not lead, and yet, the voices persisted. By the time she was 16, Joan had journeyed far from her village. She convinced a garrison commander to grant her an escort. She cut her hair short, dressed in male clothing, and rode through enemy territory to reach the heir to the French throne, Charles, the Dauphin. It is difficult now, from a modern vantage, to grasp the audacity of it. A teenage peasant girl walking into the court of a would-be king and claiming divine instruction. But Joan was not brash. She was calm, measured, certain. And Charles, desperate and surrounded by doubt, listened. Joan was granted troops, armor, a banner bearing the image of Christ, and under her direction, the siege of Orleans was lifted in just 9 days. The tide had turned. But her victories, though astonishing, would not protect her forever. In 1430, she was captured by the Burgundians and sold to the English. She was brought to Rouen, and here, in a long, slow unwinding, began her trial. The court was not civil, it was ecclesiastical. She was not treated as a soldier, but as a heretic. Not because she killed, but because she dared to speak of God. The transcripts of her trial have survived over 100 pages of careful record. Through these words, we can still hear her voice, calm and polite, sometimes sharp, but never cruel. A bishop asked her, "Do you know if you are in God's grace?" A trap. For to say yes would be arrogant. To say no would be heresy. Joan replied, "If I am not, may God place me there. If I am, may God so keep me." Such responses did not endear her to her judges. She was questioned over many days, often for hours, often alone. They pressed her on her clothing, her voices, her banner, her obedience. She spoke of her saints, always with reverence. She described how they guided her, how they warned her of her capture, how they comforted her. And always, the silence of the court followed her words. A silence not of contemplation, but of calculation. The court accused her of sorcery, of dressing like a man, of placing her own will above the church. When threatened with torture, she said simply, "Even if you tear me limb from limb, I will not tell you anything else. And if I do say something, afterwards I will still say you made me." They never tortured her. Perhaps they feared what it would reveal. Eventually, under pressure and exhaustion, Joan signed a document of abjuration, a forced confession saying she would submit to the church. But it did not end there. She was placed in a secular prison, guarded by men, and denied access to nuns. She asked to return to the church's custody. She asked to wear a dress again, but nothing changed. And so, when she returned to her male clothing, perhaps in protest, perhaps for protection, they declared her a relapsed heretic. The sentence was death. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was led through the streets of Rouen. She wore a simple gown. Her hands were tied. She asked for a cross. A sympathetic English soldier made one for her out of 2 sticks. As the flames were lit, she called out the name of Jesus, again and again. Eyewitnesses say the crowd fell silent. One English soldier was said to have whispered, "We are lost. We have burned a saint." She was 19 years old, and then silence. But not forever. 25 years later, the church reopened her case. They examined the transcripts, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and in 1456, they declared her innocent. They called her trial a sham and her execution a mistake. Centuries passed. In 1920, she was canonized as a saint. Today, her image stands in cathedrals, in stained glass and sculpture. But in that stone hall in Rouen, what remains is the echo of her voice, composed, unwavering, softly defiant. And so, the rhythm of her life, visions, silence, judgment, continues to resonate. A hymn not of triumph, but of steadfastness. Let the memory of her linger now, gently, as we turn to another chamber of quiet resistance. This time, one hidden behind the walls of a sacred island. The sea recedes slowly, revealing a glistening path of sand and stone. Above the misty horizon, rising from the tidal flats like something half-imagined, stands Mont Saint-Michel, a monastery built on rock, surrounded by shifting waters, wrapped in myth and solitude. It is here, within its deep stone stairways and echoing halls, that a quiet kind of resistance once took shape, not with swords or banners. Let us walk softly now, up the worn stone steps of this sacred island. The tide has gone out, The path is clear for a time, though it will vanish again with the moon's command. Imagine yourself at the edge of the medieval world around the 13th or 14th century. As you enter through the low gate and ascend slowly toward the abbey, the smell of salt lingers in the air, blending with the damp earth and aged timber. The walls, thick with centuries of sea spray, seem to sigh under their own memory. This was not only a place of prayer and pilgrimage, it was also a place of learning. The monks of Mont Saint-Michel held to the rule of Saint Benedict, yes, but they also held to parchment, ink, and knowledge. Over time, they built something quietly remarkable: a library. Not vast by modern standards, not flamboyant, but secret, careful, guarded. Books in the medieval world were not common. A single manuscript painstakingly copied by hand on animal skin, decorated with pigments made from crushed minerals and metals, could take months, even years, to complete. Most were kept in cathedrals or royal treasuries. Some were chained to desks, some hidden in chests. At Mont Saint-Michel, the books were kept behind the cloisters, above the scriptorium, in a chamber warmed by no fire. Fire, after all, was danger. The room was called the Scriptoria Librorum, the book room. There, in quiet hours and dimming light, monks copied sacred texts, commentaries, ancient philosophy, and even forbidden or forgotten works. The island's isolation helped protect them from invaders, from reformers, and even from occasional orders to destroy texts considered suspect. Among the shelves and cupboards, you might find the writings of Augustine, books on logic, books on poetry, but also perhaps tucked discreetly, wrapped in cloth, a translation of Aristotle, or a pagan myth, written in Latin but smuggled from older tongues. The monastery's location made it difficult to reach and difficult to search. The tides created a natural defense, as did the abbey's rising terraces. Books could be moved, hidden, returned. A cart arriving from Cannes or Tours might carry grain or manuscripts. We do not know everything that passed through those halls. Records were few, and many have vanished. But we know this: when the 100 Years' War raged, and the flames of conquest spread across France, Mont Saint-Michel held strong. English troops besieged the island, but never took it. And inside, behind the altar and under vaulted ceilings, the monks kept copying. It is quiet work, repetitive, but there is reverence in it. Each letter drawn with care, each word tested against memory and rule. Now imagine a candlelit chamber, high in the abbey. A monk bends over his desk. He does not look up. He has been copying for hours. Around him are scrolls and scraps, some loose, some bundled, some half-translated from Greek or Arabic. He pauses to blow gently across the ink, then continues. He knows that this work may never be seen by many, that the book he copies may one day be shelved, unopened for decades. But still, he writes, because to copy is to preserve, and to preserve is to resist the erasure of time. Sometimes, marginal notes appear in the manuscripts, small sketches of animals or saints. A faded comment, too cold to write today. Another, Brother Thomas spilled the ink. These human touches whispered across centuries remind us that even in silence, voices persist. And so, the secret books of Mont Saint-Michel survived. Not all of them. Time has taken its toll. But hundreds remain, some now kept in national archives, some still in the abbey's care. They are more than relics. They are echoes of patient hands, hidden thoughts, sacred labor. They are what endures when noise fades, what remains when the world turns away. Quiet resistance in ink and parchment. The tides continue to come and go. The walls still stand. The wind still curls through the cloisters. And the books, Silent as ever. Wait. And the sea returns to shroud the island once more. Imagine again the hush of a medieval church. The rhythm of bells marking the hours. The muffled footfalls in stone corridors. The quiet labor of cloistered life. Now, allow your mind to wander slightly upward, beyond the dormitories, past the common into chambers reserved not for the many, but for the few. This is the domain of the abbot. While monks lived with severity, sleeping on straw, eating little, speaking almost never, the abbot occupied a world both of responsibility and, quietly, of exception. He was, officially, a servant of the rule of Saint Benedict, like any other. But in practice, he was its interpreter, its guardian, and, sometimes, its beneficiary. To hold the role of abbot was to live with a quiet tension between sacred duty and subtle privilege. Let us walk softly now through the abbot's apartments. The air here is warmer, if only slightly. A small brazier may glow with embers. The furnishings are still austere, but the table is larger, the bed is higher, the windows are wider, admitting light where others lived in shadow. The rule dictated humility, but allowed for the dignity of office. And so, over time, dignity acquired its trappings. A private study, a chamber for receiving guests, shelves with not only sacred texts, but letters from bishops and nobles. Perhaps a bottle of wine, kept not for indulgence, but for diplomacy. The abbot did not labor in the fields. He did not copy texts by candlelight for hours. His hands, while still folded in prayer, bore fewer counts. He administered. He decided. He managed lands, oversaw rents, negotiated with the powerful beyond the monastery walls. In many ways, he stood at a crossroads between the cloister and the world. Outside in the town or village under the monastery's domain, he was a figure of authority. He might be called to court. He might advise a king. He might write letters that shaped the lives of hundreds. Inside, he was both father and ruler. Addressed as Domnessa Latin, title of honor, he presided over the chapter meetings, delivered sermons, and enacted discipline. And yet, with power came temptation. In some monasteries, the abbots came from noble families. Their appointments were sometimes made not by election, but by royal favor. They might hold multiple abbeys in commendam, drawing income from each while rarely visiting. Some abbots traveled with retinues, dined in private, wore fine robes embroidered subtly with gold thread. Not all did this, of course. Many remained deeply devoted models of piety and restraint. But the structure itself allowed room for disparity. In the refectory, the common monks would eat in silence. Vegetables, beans, small portions of fish. The abbot, in his chambers, might receive game meat, bread of finer flour, wine diluted but fragrant. These meals were not feasts, but they were more than sustenance. In some abbeys, when monks fell ill, they were moved to the infirmary, watched over by rotating brethren. The abbot, by contrast, might have a personal physician, and yet it was understood, if not spoken aloud, that these differences were not indulgences, but necessities of leadership. Still, one can imagine the quiet questions that must have lingered in the minds of the brothers, they who rose in darkness, who whispered prayers into the chill air, who fasted, confessed, labored. Did they wonder softly, without accusation, about the life above? Perhaps they did. Or perhaps they accepted the abbot's station as a reflection of the divine order, where hierarchy was not challenge, but comfort. Just as the stars held their places in the heavens, so too did the abbot hold his. In this, we glimpse the slow and solemn nature of medieval thought, that inequality, when ordained, was not injustice, but part of God's unknowable design. Even so, there are records, occasional murmurs, of monks petitioning Rome, complaining of excessive spending, of abbots absent too long, of rules bent too far, but such instances were rare. More often, the system held. The abbot's privilege remained discreet, woven into the stone of the abbey itself. Today, when we walk through surviving monasteries, we can still see the distinction. A narrow dormitory here, a grand chamber there. The contrast is not loud, but it is present. And in this contrast, we glimpse something essential about the human experience. Even in the most sacred spaces, even in places built for renunciation, a gentle hierarchy blooms. Not always out of pride, sometimes simply out of habit, sometimes out of need, and sometimes out of the quiet understanding that power wielded with care might protect the silence that others depend on. So let us linger, just for a moment, in that upper room. The candle flickers, the wind brushes the ancient shutters. Below, the monks begin to chant the evening prayer. Their voices rise softly, folding over one another like ocean waves. The abbot listens, then joins, a single voice among many. And with that, we draw near the end of our time in this world of stone, silence, and sacred rhythm. Let us return once more to the heart of monastic life, not in the chapel nor the cloister, but the dining room. Imagine the long stone hall. Narrow windows allow soft daylight to settle upon rough-hewn tables. There is no clatter, no laughter, only the quiet rustle of robes, the gentle placing of bowls, and, often, the low murmur of scripture read aloud, while others eat. This is where meals were taken. And yet, to say meals may be misleading, for the monastic table was not a place of pleasure, but of purpose. Food was nourishment for the body, yes, but more than that, it was a spiritual tool, an exercise in denial, a daily reminder of humility, obedience, and the fleeting nature of desire. Let us sit quietly now at the table, a bowl before you. Perhaps it is filled with lentil soft, earthy, and plain. A coarse loaf of bread, rough to the touch, sits beside it. There may be a few herbs scattered on top. A cup filled not with wine, but with small beer or weak ale, low in alcohol, brewed for safety more than flavor. You lift your spoon, no one speaks. In most Benedictine monasteries, silence during meals was enforced. The rule allowed a single voice, the reader who would recite from holy texts or edifying stories. The rest listened, chewing slowly, absorbing not only food, but wisdom. The meals themselves followed the liturgical calendar. Wednesdays and Fridays were meatless. Advent and Lent brought further us. In some orders, meat was banned altogether, viewed as indulgent, even sinful. The flesh of animals, particularly four-legged beasts, was said to stir the flesh of man. Instead, monks ate fish when they could get it. More often, their protein came from legumes and dairy, cheese, eggs, perhaps on feast days. Salt was used sparingly. Spices, if available, were mild and metered. Sugar was virtually unknown. Monasteries grew much of their own food: cabbage, leeks, onions, beans. In colder regions, root vegetables were stored in cellars through winter. Herbs were grown for both flavor and medicine: sage, mint, rosemary, hyssop. Each abbey had a kitchen garden, tended with quiet devotion. There were also orchards, apiaries, and grain fields, all under the watch of the Salarian-appointed monk responsible for supplies, stores, and preparation. His role was practical, but also sacred. Food preparation was not left to outsiders. Monks took turns in the kitchen, cooking in silence, following traditions that stretched back generations. Recipes were passed not in writing, but by hand and eye and memory. And it wasn't only what you ate, but how you ate. Meals were served in moderation. You did not return for seconds. You did not complain. Appetite was a temptation. Fullness, a danger. The rule of Saint Benedict states, "We think it sufficient for the daily dinner, whether at the 6th or the 9th hour, that every table have 2 cooked dishes because of individual weaknesses, so that he who cannot eat one may partake of the other." This was not indulgence. This was a nod to our human weaknesses, and yet, on certain feast days, the table shifted. More dishes might appear: sweetened almonds, dates, or a spiced pottage. These rare treats were not rewards, but reflections of divine joy, markers of sacred time. Still, even then, joy was tempered. There were things you would never taste. No roast meats, no butter-rich pastries, no wine flowing freely, no citrus, no chocolate, no coffee. Those came centuries later. No sauces thick with cream, no sugar confections, no extravagance of any kind. This absence was not a hardship, but a chosen stillness, a quieting of the senses to allow the spirit to speak more clearly. Even hunger, when it came, was seen as a gift, a participation in the suffering of Christ, a stripping away of worldly comfort. And yet, there was also care. The infirmary meals were different, softer, richer, even sweetened when possible. Sick brothers were to be nourished without limit, their needs given priority over rules. Monks also believed food had meaning beyond its ingredients. Bread was the body of Christ. Wine, though rare, echoed the sacred cup. Even the act of sharing a meal reflected the Last Supper, a moment of unity. So, as you imagine the clink of pottery and the rustle of linen robes, remember, here, in this hushed hall, food was not merely sustenance. It was obedience. It was simplicity. It was the soul, practiced in silence. Now, as the dishes are cleared, the last crumbs gathered, and the day's labor resumes, we prepare to shift our gaze once again, this time to the solitary figure of a woman cloistered far from power, yet destined to echo through centuries with song, vision, and defiance. The silence of a monastery can seem impenetrable, but within that stillness, there are moments when something else breaks through, neither sound nor speech, but a kind of presence. In the 12th century, within the confines of a Benedictine convent near the Rhine River, one woman claimed to receive visions. Vivid, divine, unshakable. Her name was Hildegard of Bingen. Let us move gently now through her cloistered world. She was born in 1098, the 10th child in a noble family offered to the church as a tithe. From a young age, she experienced what she later called the living light. Flashes of celestial images. Voices that spoke not to her ears, but to her soul. As a child, Hildegard was enclosed in a cell with an anchoress named Gita. The stone walls were high. The routine was severe. Yet within that enclosure, something profound began to stir. Hildegard learned to read Latin, to chant the Psalms, to write with care and purpose, and all the while, the visions continued. She kept them secret, at first afraid, perhaps of being judged or misunderstood. But years later, as a grown woman and now abbess of her own community, she began to write. She described what she saw: luminous mandalas of divine order, burning wheels of light, figures of cosmic significance. They were, she insisted, revelations. In her most famous work, Sivia, short for Know the Ways of the Lord, she painted, quite literally, her visions. With vivid golds and reds, the illustrations accompanied complex theological commentary. She described the structure of the universe, the harmony of the soul, the fall of man, and the path to redemption. Her writing was mystical, yes, but rooted deeply in orthodoxy. It was not rebellion, but revelation. Still, her authority was remarkable. a woman in a patriarchal church, a visionary when many feared heresy, a voice rising from a world meant to be voiceless. She corresponded with popes, emperors, and archbishops. Her letters were firm, sometimes scolding. She spoke of divine justice, of leadership failing the faithful, of corruption cloaked in holy robes. And always, her visions gave her courage. But Hildegard's gifts did not stop at theology. She was also a composer. Imagine, now, the sound of her music. Unlike the restrained chants of Gregorian tradition, Hildegard's compositions soared. Lyrical, ecstatic, filled with intervals and leaps rarely heard in her time. Her songs, called symphonia, were dedicated to saints, to Mary, to the Virgin Wisdom. They shimmer with longing, with clarity, with devotion. She believed music reflected the original harmony of Eden, that in singing, the soul aligned with the divine. Her nuns performed these pieces, and even now, hundreds of years later, her melodies are recorded and performed, transcending time and silence. She was also a healer. Her writings on herbs, gemstones, and bodily humors reveal a holistic worldview, where spirit and flesh, plant and person, were all interconnected. She prescribed fennel for digestion, lavender for calm, and believed that the energies of the cosmos influenced the body's balance. These weren't mere folk remedies. For Hildegard, medicine was spiritual. Illness reflected disorder not only in the body, but in the soul's relationship to creation. And always, through every manuscript, every melody, every medicinal note was the current of female agency. Hildegard stood, quietly but immovably, in a place where few women were heard. She claimed no title beyond abbess, yet she carved out a space of influence entirely her own. Her community of nuns grew. She moved them, at one point, from a dependent monastery to one of her own founding on a hill. In sight of the Rhine, it was a quiet defiance, carried out with prayer and strategy. She once wrote, "I am but a poor, weak woman, yet by God's grace I speak." And she did. Hildegard died in 1179, in her 80s, an astonishing age for her time. At her death, the sky was said to have glowed with strange lights, and a white cross appeared among the stars. She was not canonized in her lifetime. That came centuries later. But her memory never faded. Today, her works are studied across disciplines of musicology, theology, medicine, feminism, ecology. Her voice has become a symbol not just of mysticism, but of intellectual and spiritual power that transcends limitation. So now, in the hush of night, imagine her once more, a woman cloaked in wool, seated at a desk by a flickering lamp. Her eyes lift. Her pen moves. She writes, not from her own mind, she says, but from what she has shown. And whether you believe in visions or not, her words still rise through parchment, through plain song, through the silence that gave her strength. In the hush of predawn, before the chants begin, before the sun rises, there is only space. Stone corridors stretch in long, narrow lines. Arched ceilings hover above. Echoes linger. Footsteps do not walk alone. They are followed by the quiet breath of the building itself. To walk through a medieval monastery is to move through a kind of living labyrinth. Not a maze meant to confuse, but a layout designed for something deeper. Contemplation, containment, and perhaps even transformation. Imagine yourself here now. You pass through a small wooden door and enter the cloister. A square courtyard, surrounded on all sides by covered walkways, open to the sky, close to the world. At its center, often a garden, sometimes medicinal herbs, sometimes a well, sometimes nothing at all. The cloister was the heart of monastic architecture, a symbolic square of earth and heaven, each side connected to a different function. The chapel, the dormitory, the chapter house, the refectory. Everything had purpose. Everything had rhythm. But as you begin to walk these halls, you notice something else. The monastery does not reveal itself all at once. It unfolds. Corridors bend. Stairs descend. Some doors are open. Some are not. A novice might spend weeks learning the layout. Not because it was confusing, but because it was quiet, inward, almost shy. Each space was its own world. This intentional structure wasn't arbitrary. It echoed sacred geometry, the belief that numbers and shapes reflected divine order. Many monasteries were built on the principles of symmetry, of the circle, the square, and the cross. Even when adapted to hillsides or riverbanks, their core layout remained symbolic. In some cases, true labyrinths were carved into the stone floors of churches or chapter houses. These weren't designed to trap. They were used as a form of pilgrimage. For monks who would never travel to Jerusalem, walking the labyrinth was a substitute journey. A devotional path, one that twisted and circled but always led to the center representing the heart of God. There were also spiral staircases with no railings, narrow passageways with slits of light, secret rooms tucked behind altars, storage cellars whose steps descended into cool silence. Why so complex? Partly for defense. Monasteries needed protection not just from invading armies, but from wandering travelers, thieves, and sometimes political enemies. Hidden chambers protected relics, manuscripts, and sometimes even people. But more often, the complexity was inward-facing. Monastic life was built around routines that looped and returned just like the architecture. Every day echoed the last. Every week mirrored the one before. The rhythm of bells, the return to the same prayer, the same path walked from dormitory to chapel and back again. This was not monotony. It was meditation made physical. Some monasteries, like those of the Cistercian order, chose simplicity. Their buildings were stripped of decoration, stark in their purity. Others, like Cluny, embraced grander high arches, carved capitals, and long, vaulted aisles meant to draw the eye upward, toward heaven. Mont Saint-Michel, perched on a tidal island off the coast of Normandy, combined both mystery and defense. Its steep walkways, narrow turns, and layered construction made it nearly impregnable from the outside and deeply introspective within. To walk Mont Saint-Michel is to climb toward silence, to rise, quite literally, from the world of markets and travelers below, up through layers of cloister, dormitory, refectory, and finally to the abbey church standing alone above the sea. The architecture itself becomes a metaphor for the soul's ascent. Even the cells' small, spare rooms for individual monks reflected this philosophy. A single window, a stone bench, sometimes a niche for prayer. The walls did not oppress. They focused. And throughout it all, there were places the public never saw. Storage halls, scriptoriums hidden behind thick doors, treasury rooms, infirmaries, even ossuaries, quiet resting places for the bones of those who had passed. To those inside, every step carried meaning. A hallway was not just a passage. It was a narrowing of the world. A stairwell was not merely descent, it was humility. A cloister was not a prison. It was a garden between time and eternity. So as we walk these stone paths together, let your mind move slowly. Notice how the walls breathe in the silence, how the shadows fall at different hours, how the very design seems to invite stillness. In these labyrinths, there is no hurry. There is only return, again and again, until the soul, too, begins to spiral inward and upward. Let us pause now. At the end of the corridor, a heavy wooden door creaks open. Through it, we see not a chapel, but a different space, an infirmary, a place of care, of quiet mercy. Tucked into the quieter corners of a monastery, often near the cloister, but never far from the chapel, was a place where the rhythm of life slowed even further. The monastic infirmary, stone walls, wooden beds, herbal scents floating through the air, lavender, sage, perhaps a trace of vinegar. A table with folded cloths, a bowl of water, still and clear. Here monks tended to the sick, not only their own brothers, but also weary travelers, pilgrims too weak to continue, and villagers in times of plague or hunger. The monastery was not just a haven for the spirit, it was, at times, the only sanctuary for the body. The monastic hospital was not grand. There were no ornate decorations. Beds were narrow, light was limited, but there was care. Quiet, consistent care. The infirmarian, usually an older monk trained in healing, would move gently from bed to bed. He was not a doctor in the modern sense. He knew little of anatomy as we know it, but he understood the body's humors, the virtues of herbs, and the sacredness of presence. He read from ancient texts, Pliny, Galen, Hippocrates, blended with the church's own teachings. He knew when to offer warmth, when to apply a salve, and when simply to sit in prayer. Herbal remedies were central. Chamomile for calming, comfrey for wounds, yarrow for fever, mint for digestion. Often, the herbs were grown just outside, in the cloister garden, gathered at dawn, with dew still clinging to the leaves. Simple meals were prepared for the ill: broth, softened bread, perhaps a poached egg if permitted. Ale was weakened with water. Milk, when available, was warmed and served slowly. The infirmary also housed those approaching death, and here, monastic life offered something truly unique. A vision of dying not as defeat, but as passage. In the 15th century, a text began to circulate across Europe, Ars Moriendi, the art of dying. It provided guidance, prayers, and images to help the faithful prepare for death with peace and grace. Monks followed this tradition with quiet devotion. When a brother neared the end of life, he was not left alone. He was placed on a straw-filled mattress near the chapel, if possible. A candle was lit, its flame a symbol of the soul's strength to carry on. The other monks gathered, not with cries or fear, but with chant. The litany of the saints, the commendation of the dying, familiar Latin phrases whispered in harmony, rising and falling like breath itself. Confession was heard, last rites were given. A hand held kindly, a cross placed on the chest, and when the final breath left the body, it was not described in grim terms. It was spoken of as a departure, a crossing, a quiet homecoming. Afterward, the body was washed slowly, reverently, clothed in a simple robe, buried with no fanfare, sometimes in a communal grave, sometimes in the cloister garth, beneath the grass and sky. But the infirmary also treated life. Pilgrims arrived limping, coughing, sunburned from the road. Monks cleaned their feet, gave them warm soup, and let them rest. During outbreaks of plague or famine, the monastery opened its doors as far as it could risk an infection, but holding fast to charity. During the Black Death, monastic infirmaries bore witness to devastation. Entire communities were wiped away. Monks tended to the dying, even as they themselves fell ill. It was not heroism they sought. It was obedience to a rule of life that called them to mercy. Records from these times are sparse, but they speak of silence, of fevered breath, of prayer spoken into darkness. And still, amid loss, the rhythm continued. The bells still rang, the psalms still rose, the candle was still lit. In these quiet rooms, there was no glory, no reward, only service. And perhaps that is the essence of monastic healing, not in the curing of illness, but in the dignity of care. Imagine it now. A narrow bed, a monk sitting beside it, his hand resting lightly on a brow, a prayer murmured under breath. the flicker of light on stone. Outside, the bells call to prayer. But here, time pauses. Here, death is met not with fear, but with stillness. And as one life ends, another chant begins.